Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on Let's Talk About Accessibility, Accessible Communication for All. Today's speaker will be Amy Shapley, the Director of Community Access, Able, South Carolina. But first, I want to introduce you to the Center for Disability Empowerment Executive Director, Susan Hetrick.
Well, good morning, everybody. I was just looking through the chat here, and I saw Jay posted good morning from ICY Columbus, and I'm sitting here trying to think agency is ICY. And then it dawned on me, yes, it is IC here and growing so in the Columbus area. And I see that Dallas is having the same thing. So I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy out there. The Center for Disability Empowerment serves under the direction and choice of people with disabilities. And we provide supports for them so that they can live and learn and work and play right alongside people who don't have disabilities as they choose. We received a grant in the fall through the Able, South Carolina, which is a center similar to ours, and ILRU, which is the Independent Living Resource Utilization, and their Disability Vaccine Access Opportunities Center. Our grant is intended to address the increasing the number of vaccinations for people with disabilities in Central Ohio, specifically 4 counties in Central Ohio. And more importantly, I think, is to increase the outreach so we can address the hesitancy of the community, so we can provide information about where vaccinations are happening, why it's important. You know all of that, but frequently that outreach is not accessible, and not accessible even from the government agencies, local businesses, medical providers who are providing those. It's either not available or it's not accessible to people with disabilities. So thus the topic today for our training. As Deb said, Amy Shapley is with Able, South Carolina, and is the Director of Community Access there. She leads the Able Access program to assist clients with becoming more accessible and inclusive. She works with businesses to create accessible policies, procedures, and job planning for disabled employees. She also provides training on the ADA, disability sensitivity, and digital accessibility. So with that, Amy, I would like to welcome you, and you can take it from there.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am, just to give you a visual description, I am a white woman in my 40s. I have a blonde pixie cut. I'm wearing a light blue shirt with a gray sweater today and black rimmed glasses. And I am recovering from laryngitis. So please bear with me, but I'm very excited to be here with you today. I've been resting up my voice so I could present, because this is such a great opportunity to share this across your state and your networks. I am the Director of Community Access, which basically means that I work to remove barriers for people in South Carolina as well as nationwide. So we work really across lots of different locations and do a lot of different work. And I'm going to cover a lot of the work that I do today in what we're talking about. So let me see if I can get my, there we go. So we are, as we just talked about, we are Center for Independent Living as well. This is a photo of some of our staff standing behind our governor in South Carolina, signing in legislation that protects parents with disabilities in regards to social service investigations. So that's what that photo is of. So Centers for Independent Living really are organizations that are about not helping people necessarily with disabilities, but really building them up to do the things that they want to do. And so this is a photo of some of our staff and board members celebrating the 25th anniversary of Able, South Carolina. But did want to highlight the independent living philosophy, because this is really going to help you understand why we're doing this work and what we're trying to accomplish with accessibility. So independent living philosophy emphasizes consumer control, and that's the idea that people with disabilities are the best experts on their own needs, having crucial and valuable perspective to contribute, and are deserving of equal opportunity to decide how to live, work, and take part in their communities, particularly in reference to services that powerfully affect their day-to-day lives and access to independence. So as Centers for Independent Living, we all provide community-based services. We are consumer-driven. We work across all disabilities. So we are going to hit on multiple types of disabilities today in our accessibility work. And we are all nonprofit 501c3s. And we were created out of a provision or an amendment to the Rehabilitation Act that provides for consumer control centers for independent living in every state. And we do practice what we preach. So over 90% of our staff have a disability. So this presentation is very informed by individuals with disabilities. My team, we have 2 individuals who are blind, who inform a lot of the information about screen readers and other visual content, making visual content accessible. But we have all types of disabilities on our staff. So all of our trainings and information are vetted across disabilities, and at least 51% of our board members have a disability at all times. So the federal law requires that over half of our board and staff have a disability. So we do offer information and referral, which just means connecting people to resources in the community. We provide independent living skills based on the goals that consumers create for themselves. We provide peer mentoring, advocacy, and that's really where I work, and then transitional services, so helping people move from restrictive to less restrictive, or restrictive to community-based living situations, or helping people transition from youth to adulthood, so into that independent living place of life. But with advocacy, we really do a lot of work just to educate and help people understand what some of the barriers are and what we can do to remove them. So why are we talking about accessibility? I'm so glad you asked. We need it because disability represents the largest marginalized community in America. 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. In our state, South Carolina, we're not one of the healthiest states. So 1 in 3 South Carolinians has a disability. And so I'm not sure, I did not look up the Ohio rate, but you can look up your rate in your states. But overall 1 in 4 Americans. And so that crosses all social, racial, and cultural groups. So we do see a lot of multiple marginalizations as well. And so when we create accessible communication, it does benefit everyone, and it helps remove barriers for people and reduce marginalizations for people who might be experiencing multiple marginalizations. It's also the law for that's built into different federal laws like 508 and 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the ADA, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, the Telecommunications Act, and other legal protections for people with disabilities. And so really thinking about cross disability, we do see that lots of different types of disabilities are affected by accessibility concerns. So among people with visual disabilities, which can include blindness, low vision, or color blindness, when digital content especially is not made accessible, that's a huge barrier to getting information that's needed. We see with hearing disabilities that including things like background noise can be a big barrier because we want to make sure that our recordings are quality and that there's no distractions in that or anything that's going to take away from the information that's being shared. We do appreciate that there's captioning today for people with hearing disabilities to make sure that everyone gets the information that's being provided. Motor disabilities can really impact the ability to use a mouse. It also can create slow response times or difficulties with fine motor control that can impact typing or navigating. So we want to make those things as easy as possible. When we think about if we're providing a quiz or if we have scrolling information, how quickly is that information being shared, or what's the timeout on those, so that people who have a slow response time have time to stop the information, pause the information, or respond to a question. And then we also want to consider cognitive differences. So that includes learning disabilities, distractibility, inability to remember or focus on large amounts of information, possible age-related limitations, and lack of computer internet experience that can cause challenges or barriers when thinking about accessible content. So we're going to start out, we're going to cover several different topic areas today. And the first one that's really going to raise your accessibility to the most people is plain language and readability. So plain language, it's actually required for federal entities. And I know you're all thinking, yes, of course, because every form and document I read from the federal government is very easy to understand. And we know that's not necessarily true, but there is a Plain Writing Act of 2010, which requires federal agencies to use clear government communications that the public can understand and use. So the purpose is really to enhance access for information and services and establish that public issued documents be written clearly, and then help make information more accessible to the public. So if you are dealing with federal agency and you're having difficulties with the information, there is a Plain Writing Act that defines what that needs to look like. But what is plain language? It's simply a communication that's made to ensure that as many people as possible can read, understand, and process the information that's being given. So things like jargon or academic or legally complex language are access barriers to people with disabilities. And other people as well are impacted by difficult to understand language. Plain language uses everyday language, and it's accessible for people with low literacy. So again, for South Carolina, we are not one of the healthiest states. We are also not one of the highest with our literacy level. So I think the average is a 4th to 5th grade reading level in South Carolina. So you can kind of think about in your state or in your local area what the local literacy or reading level is, and then think about how easier to understand language can really benefit everyone. It also benefits people who speak English as a second language. So we want to make sure that everyone has the most clear information as possible, so it's not getting lost in translation. And then it does help people with disabilities as well. So plain language, what it does is it puts the audience first. So first and foremost, you're thinking, what do I want someone who's reading this to take away, and really focus on that. So you're thinking, I want to communicate where to get a vaccine, or I want to communicate that vaccines are safe, or I want to communicate that we provide support for people with disabilities. Whatever that takeaway is, you might have opportunities to list lots of different things, but really thinking about on this page, in this sentence, in this section of information, what does the audience need to take away? And then secondly, it does improve your writing style, content organization, and format. I do a lot of grant writing, and in grant writing, we tend to use a lot of fancy words, but we also have a lot of word count limitations. And so plain language really cuts down the number of words you use. So if you're a grant writer or do a lot of grant reporting, you may have already come up against this and you've learned how to cut out some of the words. If you haven't, plain language will help you do that because you really think about, do I need all of these words, and can these be confusing to people if I add more words? So it really helps, streamline your writing. It does promote honest and open communication because you are focusing on the main point and the main takeaway, and so you're not getting lost in all the other information that could be in that document or in that email or whatever it is that you're crafting. And then it improves services through cleaner forms, documents, letters, and signs. And so as we think about plain language, you really want to think about this across everything that you do. And it does take some time and effort. It also takes a real awareness of thinking that everything that we put out there communicates to people clearly. And we've worked with some organizations. Recently, we worked with a crisis center in another state. And we reviewed all of their intake documents. We reviewed all of their communication to potential clients, and took out all of the confusing information. A lot of it was legal. My background is in counseling before this, and so there are a lot of legal things that need to be covered in an intake. But we also want to make sure that the person signing off on that fully understands what they're signing and understands the implications of that. So it does that. It helps us create better documents and forms and information. What it doesn't do is it doesn't dumb down information or take away any kind of meaning from the information. We don't use improper language or slang. We avoid slang, so we don't use that. We don't use patronizing language, so we're not talking down to our reader. We are talking to our reader. We don't change the essential ideas or content, and we don't use any kind of inaccurate, incomplete, or imprecise writing. So it's not about it's really about improving your writing, not taking away from your writing. So some tips for plain language: again, knowing your audience is key. Using everyday language, so avoiding difficult terms, jargon, slang, localisms, anything like that that could get lost on people. You do want to use personal pronouns like you to talk directly to the reader. And again, avoiding slang, writing short and logical sentences, really keeping one idea per sentence is important. Leave out details that might distract your reader. Avoid anything that's undefined or technical. Not that you can't use technical terms, you just want to make sure that you do define what those terms mean. Be very direct, don't use a lot of words. You want to use headings and subheadings and margins, as well as white space, to organize your information and make it easy to find and read on the page. And then use words with fewer syllables. And the goal is to keep your wording between the 3rd and 5th grade reading level. So we're going to give you a chance to practice this. We're going to jump right in. So this is some information from the CDC before plain language. So it says, mRNA vaccines contain material from the virus that causes COVID-19 that gives our cells instructions for how to make a harmless protein that is unique to the virus. After our cells make copies of the protein, they destroy the genetic material from the vaccine. Our bodies recognize that the protein should not be there and build T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes that will remember how to fight the virus and cause COVID-19 if we are infected in the future. So again, this grant that we've been working on is specific to COVID-19 vaccinations. And I do a lot of work on creating materials about COVID-19 and about vaccines that are in plain language and easy to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of minutes of silence to take out a piece of paper or pull up your Word on your computer. Really think about the hardest words on here and how you could change some of this to make it easier to read in plain language. So I do have an example after this of what that could look like, but I want to give you guys a few minutes to try. I'm also going to take a sip of my drink while we do this. So I'm just going to give you guys a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back, and you can either put it in the chat or you can come off of mute and share with us verbally what you have come up with. All right, we've got our first response in from Joan. COVID-19 vaccines teach your body to recognize and fight against the virus. The vaccine is harmless to you and will protect you. Thank you for sharing that. Do we have any other brave souls? And thank you for being brave to share. Do we have anyone else who wants to share? Anybody? We'll go to our next. Maybe change mRNA to brand names. That is one of the things that we have done mRNA vaccines such as Pfizer or Moderna. So yeah, mRNA vaccine. Alexia says, mRNA vaccines help teach our bodies how to fight off the COVID-19 virus. The vaccines do this by creating a similar but harmless version of the sickness. I think I missed another. Oh, and Melissa said, COVID-19 vaccines can help your body recognize and fight off the COVID-19 vaccine. It should become infected in the future. Oh, goodness. Okay, so here's an example that we used. So we put it into a list, which is helpful a lot of times for people to read. So what we put was mRNA, or what are mRNA vaccines and how do they work? So first of all, we used a title to help the reader understand what it is that we're trying to say in this bit of information. mRNA vaccines have a harmless material from the virus that causes COVID-19 in them. This material gives your cells instructions for how to make a protein that is unique to the virus. The cells in your body make copies of this protein. This helps your body recognize that the protein should not be there and build something called T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes to fight the protein that should not be there. If you're infected with COVID-19, these lymphocytes will help your body remember how to fight the virus. So again, like we said, we're not taking away the information. We still want everyone to have the same information. We're just breaking it down into easy to understand sentences, one at a time. Each concept is broken down into its own individual piece of information and builds on each other, so that if you have this piece of understanding, this next sentence will make sense. And then if you understand that sentence, then this next sentence will make sense. So that's one version. That you know, there's no 100% like this is the only way to write it. Plain language is an art, and you do have to, you know, work at it. But again, we want to make sure that that all the information is getting communicated, that it's just being communicated in a way that's understandable. Yes, so the reason that plain language uses bullets a lot is because it does break it down. It helps the reader if you break it down into a list, and then it creates a separation of the pieces of information, right? So this piece of kind of what I was just saying, but this piece of information and then this piece of information. So it gives an order and a structure. It breaks down the information into smaller pieces, and it lays it out in a list for the reader to better understand. Great question. Yes. And so we actually created, I'm sorry, I'm just saying yes. So Joan said, it seems like it would be really helpful to find a common language or common item metaphor, because the components of information are so foreign to most of us. Even when it's explained clearly, it can feel confusing. Yes, and it's hard to do this in a website, I mean, a PowerPoint alone. I would encourage you to go to our website if you would like to. It's able-sc.org. And I'll just type it in here when you have a chance. And we have a COVID-19 FAQs on there. And so it really breaks it down. And we do use the same information over and over again. So one of the things that we do is like, we have a tab that's like, what are mRNA vaccines? And then what are vaccines? Then what are mRNA vaccines? And then and so we break down what is COVID-19. So it really breaks it down. And so you want to make sure that, you know, this is, again, translating a bit of information. It's not going to stand entirely alone. And so we also created an FAQ guide that that the SIL has access to as well. So I don't know, Deb, if you could share some of that information with anyone who's interested as well. There's some FAQs that we've provided to our grantees that they can share with folks as well. So there's a lot of plain language resources that we've developed, but it's true, we do need to use the same terminology. And we're actually going to do another activity in a few minutes. And when we do that, we will, you'll see how to kind of reuse some of that information as well.
Amy,
yeah,
there were 3 comments or questions in the Q&A part asked by Janice. First, she says, since you're talking about mRNA vaccines, wouldn't it be important to cite the names of the vaccines that fall into this category? Then she said, not all of the COVID-19 vaccines are mRNA vaccines. And then people are hearing more about Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, not mRNA and other broad categories.
Right. And so, like, as I was saying, so in the information that we've shared, we have what are mRNA vaccines, and then we have another section, and how do they work? And then we have another section that says, what vaccines are mRNA, and then we have, how many shots of each vaccine, and we break down the information further. So again, this is just an example of how to take a section of the information, but it's not going to be comprehensive for someone to understand everything about mRNA vaccines. This is just how they work. So this is just the section on how mRNA vaccines work. So again, if you want to go to our website, and also if your hosts want to share some of the information that they've been given as well, we do have those out there. But again, this is just an example of taking a small piece of information and translating it. But yes, those are all very valid points, which are important to address as you're doing this work. But those resources are out there, and also those are the things you want to think about when you're sharing information, that you want to make sure you're explaining all the different parts and pieces. We just can't do all that in one slide. So hope that answered the question. Sorry. So we're going to move on to Easy Read, which is kind of the next step of making things readable for people and more accessible. So it's building on plain language. So Easy Read is written information that's often supported by pictures, and that's clear and easy to read and understand. So you're using the concepts of plain language for how you are creating your content, but this is more on how you organize your content. So Easy Read helps people who have difficulty reading understand written information by using easy words or plain language, as well as picture, images, or step-by-step instructions. Good Easy Read tells the reader what they really need to know and what they need to take away from that information. I think there are also, okay. So some of the key items that you want to look at are writing in short sentences. So we've kind of already talked about that. One idea per sentence. But again, as we're thinking about formatting, you want to use a larger font, like a 14 to 16 point font that's very clear. So you want to avoid any kind of like curly cues and italics and, slants and things like that. So you want a very clear font. Don't write in uppercase as much as possible. Don't use jargon or acronyms or italics or underlining. So really using bold as a way to emphasize words rather than any of those other things. But again, you can use acronyms as long as you define them very clearly, but not using any jargon or acronyms that the reader may not already have access to if you don't give the explanation or definition of what those are. Always use the actual numerical numbers, don't spell out the number. So using the numeral 1 instead of the ONE. If photos are used, making sure you use good quality photos and that it reflects what you're saying. You want to reduce punctuation as much as you can, and make sure the layout is the same throughout. So again, if you're using a bulleted list in one place, go ahead and use a bulleted list throughout. Don't use a numbered list and a bulleted list. That creates more confusion. So really it's about being consistent and thinking about your layout so that it makes information easy to find, and reinforces it with images or directions, so that people can take away what to do. So readable content is accessible content. So when we create content in plain language that uses easy read structure, it does take some time and effort, but it does benefit you in the long run. So before you start this process, really think about, is this content going to be something that can be reused and reshared and helpful to lots of different people? Because you are going to have to invest some time into creating these pieces. And then can this content be clarified without losing its meaning? I can say for most of the information on COVID-19, yes, it can be clarified without losing its meaning. And it needs to be clarified because a lot of confusion about that. And okay, so
Amy,
yes.
James asks, what's the reason for always using the numeric number? I'm curious. And then wants to know, does this apply for flyers as well?
Yes. So yes and yes. So the numbers are easier just because it doesn't require, especially when you get to bigger numbers, like where there might be a hyphen, or like a 22 or things like that. So it's easier to read. It's also easier to identify that. Oh, I think someone just said, Sandra, it's easier to identify. It doesn't get lost in the wording either. So it's just easier for people to identify what number it is and to read it. So that's the main reason. And so these concepts you're going to use across any information that you're creating. So it could be a flyer, it could be your web page, it could be an e-blast, it could be a social media post, it could be an intake form or information for clients or consumers, anything like that. You just want to use it. So I pretty much check almost everything that goes out from our organization for plain language and readability. And some of those are like huge documents, like our FAQ document. So even if we're providing things to other CILs, Centers for Independent Living, or other organizations, we still put everything in plain language. We don't make an assumption about that, but it also helps to ensure that the information that we're sharing is clear and not getting lost. So try not to think about it just as like, I'm talking to this group and they need plain language, because plain language and readability really does improve the information and services for everyone. And so you're going to use this across any kind of information that you're sharing out. So readable content, again, it organizes to serve the reader. So you're going to arrange your content so that there's short titles that describe each page or each section's content, that it distinguishes it from other pages or sections of content. And you want to put the most unique or relevant information first. So again, if we're talking about COVID-19, the first thing you want to do is define COVID-19, right? Or if you haven't already defined it somewhere else in the section, in a section before. So for that section of information, if there's something that they need to know so that the rest of the information makes sense, you want to define that idea first. And using headings helps to group related paragraphs so that it's clearly describing the sections of your content. Again, keeping things short into lists or sentences. And then again, we talked about this in plain language, but using pronouns because they speak directly to the reader. They make your writing relevant to that reader. So you're not saying people should, you're saying you should. or if you are a person with a visual disability, you should know that this information is accessible with your screen reader. So you're really defining who your audience is and what their takeaway should be. And then it helps because it requires less work for your reader to understand who you're talking to and what you want them to do. So we're going to try easy read. So we're going to give you an opportunity to take this information. So again, this is from the CDC, where we get most of our information about COVID-19. And so the before says, in general, the older you are, the more health conditions you have, and the more severe the conditions, the more important it is to take preventative measures against COVID-19, such as vaccination, wearing a mask, social distancing, and practicing hand hygiene. And the source is the CDC, people with certain medical conditions on their website. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Think about how you could arrange this into sections, into lists, and into simplifying terms. Okay, so again, you can use the chat to put that in once you've created something. But I'm just going to give you a minute. I'm going to go off camera so I can blow my nose, and I'm going to let you guys work on that for just a minute.
If you have just joined us, we're taking a break to do a little exercise. We're trying to convert the paragraph that's in front of you on the screen to an easy read format.
All right, we've got our first response. Melissa Nichols, if you're older or have health issues, it's even more important to get vaccines, wear masks, and wash your hands to prevent you from getting sick. I do, I do love hand hygiene. I don't know why we can't just say wash our hands, right? So that's a much easier way to say wash your hands. We've got another one from Scott, protect yourself against COVID-19 through, I think it got cut off. Okay. Carla, if you are an older adult, you may have more health conditions. When you have more health conditions, it's more important to protect yourself. You can protect yourself by getting vaccinated. You can also protect yourself by wearing a mask and washing hands. Social distancing, which means staying 6 feet apart from others, can also help keep you safe. Then Laurelyn said, if you are older, have health problems, you should get the vaccine, wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from others, wash your hands. Karen said, as you get older, you tend to have more health issues. This is why it's important to protect yourself against COVID-19 by getting vaccinated, wearing a mask, social distancing, and washing hands. And then Anna said, how can I stay safe against COVID-19? ? And then she made a list. 1, get vaccinated. 2, wear a mask. 3, stay 6 feet away from others. 4, wash your hands. Who will get the sickest from COVID? People who are older, people who have many health conditions. Good job with breaking that down. I like it. Sandra said to prevent / protect yourself from COVID-19, wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands. Helene said, if you're an older person with 1 or more health conditions, you should take these actions against COVID-19. Kirk said, bullet point out the preventative measures. Yes, good. Sandra, get vaccine. Helen, get vaccinated. Oh, Helene's is coming through. But so she did the list of the different items. Janice said, or Janice said, if you're older or have health conditions, you should protect yourself against COVID-19 by bullet point, wearing a mask, staying 6 feet apart from others, washing your hands. Susan said, as an older adult, it's important to bullet list, wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from others, wash your hands, COVID-19 vaccine. Mike said, who needs to take preventative steps if you're older? And again, a bullet list. If you're older, if you have more health conditions, if you have severe conditions, what can you do? Is another header. bullet list, take the vaccine, wear a mask, keep space between yourself and others, wash your hands. Good job. You guys are getting this. Matthew said you may have more health conditions as you age. Being vaccinated against COVID-19 is more important if you have worse conditions. You should wear a mask, social distance, and wash your hands. Helene's is still coming through with her list, but that's good. Marley said, in general, the older you get, you have to take care of your health. The more severe the health risk, the more important it is for you to take steps to prevent getting COVID-19. This includes you getting a COVID-19 vaccine, wearing a mask, social distancing, and washing your hands. Arlene said, stop chances of getting COVID, wash hands, wear a mask when near others, do not hug. These are very important if over 50. All right, awesome, guys. Well, we're gonna go to the example. So I used some images because I can do that because I created this. And that's hard to put into a chat. But so this is afterwards. So we have two headings. The first is keep yourself safe. If you're an older person or a person with a disability, it's important to know how to keep yourself safe from COVID-19. People who are older and have serious health conditions have a higher risk of getting very sick from COVID-19. Things you can do, and then we have our list: get a COVID-19 vaccine and booster shot, wear a mask, avoid being in crowded places, stay at least 6 feet away from others, and wash your hands. And then we've got some images that represent a syringe for a vaccine shot, a mask, hand washing, and then staying separated from crowds. So this is a way, again, you can break it up into different sections and then break it down into lists. That's very helpful. One of the things that there's a lot of use of words like morbidity, severe illness, things like that. So what we say throughout all of our publications and information that we share is very sick. People understand very sick. So sometimes we say very sick or dying, depending on the information that we're sharing, or very sick and going to the hospital instead of hospitalized. Those are some common words. Instead of underlying health conditions, a lot of times we say serious health conditions, and we also use the word disability because we want to make sure that people with disabilities are getting this information, that it's not getting lost in using other terminology. So we want to make sure that we list that along with any kind of serious health conditions, that we're making sure disability is included in that, because sometimes people separate those out. So we also want to make sure that people know about booster shots. Okay. So any questions before we move on to digital accessibility about plain language or easy read? Particular parts of speech make a difference, like use of superlatives, adverbs, etc. Yes, so we try to limit those. So like we might say very sick, because it's not just getting sick, right? So when we're translating or when we're making information easier to understand and it says something like serious illness, we, instead of serious, we use very, because that's easier to understand. But also we don't want to take away from, it's not just getting sick. But in general, if it's not serving the purpose of if it's not serving the purpose of getting the same point across, then we try to cut those words out, if that makes sense. So we don't want to use them just to have them fill a sentence, but if it's serving the purpose to identify that it's not just people get sick, but people with underlying health conditions and disabilities and older people get very sick. They're more at risk of getting more sick than people who don't have those conditions, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to explain by using those words. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. All right, so we're going to transition now into digital accessibility. So again, keeping all these concepts in mind, you're going to use that for how you write. But now that we're talking about digital accessibility, we're going to talk about how you share that information out now that you've made it easy to read and understand. So how can we improve accessibility through digital communication? One of the things that we want to do is provide captions and other alternatives for multimedia. So our hosts have done a great job today of modeling this, as we do have captions, and also we are providing a PDF of the presentation for anyone who would like that. Also, there will be a where you can download the transcript afterwards. So there's a lot of opportunities to rewatch. So you want to provide as many of those alternatives as possible when you're doing something in multimedia. If you're sharing a video to your social media or your website, you want to make sure that that has captions. If you're showing a video in a presentation, any of that kind of stuff. We also want to make it easier for users to see and hear content. So again, we want to cut down any poor recordings, any background noise or information. Hopefully you guys cannot hear the roosters. I am at home today because I've been sick this week. And so I'm recording from home, and my neighbors have roosters and they are going crazy. So hopefully you don't hear that background noise, but we're trying to cut down background noise as much as possible. But you want to make sure that there are clear recordings, that any images that you use are very clear, that there's good contrast, so that people who have limited hearing or sight are able to access that information as well. You want to make all functionality of information that you share digitally accessible from a keyboard, so that it can function from a keyboard. So we're going to talk about that with screen readers, but people who have mobility issues and also people who have visual disabilities don't use a mouse to navigate information a lot of times, especially people who are blind or have a visual disability, because that is point and click, right? So you see on the screen what you want and you click it. That doesn't work for someone who can't see on the screen. So they use the keyboard to navigate. So you want to make sure that everything that you're sharing is navigable from the keyboard. You want to make content appear and operate in predictable ways. So one of the things with that is, if you have, let's say you use a next button on a presentation, and then on the next presentation that you use a got it button at the bottom, you just want to use a next button on everything so that people know what to expect, right? Or if you organize information in a certain way on one page, that also will do that on the next page. Another thing that's really hard is, like, if you put a link, let's say in your social media, and you say, like, click here to learn more, but that takes you to like a homepage, then you have to find in that homepage where to click to get the specific information. Just link it directly to the information that you want them to get to. Don't make them have to go through multiple clicks to get to it. Those types of things. So just making it as predictable as possible so that people know, if I click here, I'm going to go directly where I need to, or if I can find the information that I need in this place on this page, I'll be able to use the same skills to get to the information on the next page. Use headings and lists with proper formatting. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but using headings within the settings on your documents, because not just to visually show where information is, but using the headings as formatting so that the screen reader will know how to read it, but I'm going to go more into that. And then providing text alternatives for non-text content. And we're going to do a deep dive into that, but that's when we talk about that, we're talking about alternative text or image descriptions. Oops. So some concepts that you may encounter that you might not be familiar with, but we're going to talk about all of them right now. Alt text. So alt text is text that's invisible unless you're using a screen reader. And it is embedded or coded information that when you navigate onto an image, it will read the description of that image. And so what we would see on the screen, like, might be a picture of a mask. The alt text of that will say, black and white image of a mask, so that people know what is being represented on the page. Jay said, don't forget to add sign language videos for these deaf clients with developmental disabilities. They don't understand simple plain English. They're highly visual learners, and ensuring having signed videos will be beneficial for them. Yes, and one of the things that is a challenge to that is you either making sure that you have language for people to request that ahead of time, or you just, if you know that you have a large number or potential number of people who are deaf, to make sure that you're doing that on every video. And some of those things can be done after the fact as well, if they can't participate live, to have that a recording of that added to it later. So there are some ways to think around that, but yes, if reading the captioning is a barrier, you want to make sure that we remove that. Anna said, I struggle with alt text when I put a specific photo on a website story. Like, should it say a photo of Bob, hoping people screen readers are reading the story about Bob, or should it say a photo of a man on a bike? Good question. We're actually going to do we have a whole section on alt text. So I'm just going to put that in the parking lot, if that's okay, because we're going to do a whole section. Yeah, no problem. So column headers in tables makes it possible to interpret a table. So it's very important, if you're sharing tables of information, to make sure that your table is formatted. And the way that you do that is you can right click if you are a sighted person. If you're not a sighted person or person who uses the mouse, you can go to table properties through the keyboard. But if you are a mouse user, you would just right click and use table properties and make sure that the heading row is visible. So, most people put a column heading on there, but you want to make sure that it's formatted to always show the column header with the information that it's beneath it. Section headings should have meaningful names. That makes it possible to navigate large amounts of content. Headings are different than headers. So headers are something that goes across the table. Headings are sections of information, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Restricted access. So editing must be enabled for a screen reader to access content in a Word document. So you might be able to convert it to a PDF and use a PDF checker before publishing. That takes doing the accessibility check and being able to remediate PDFs. You have to have the Pro version to be able to do that. I have that. We have a few people on our staff that have it. So I get like all the PDFs for my organization to make sure they're accessible before we share them out. The PDF that you will receive after this training is accessible, but that takes some time and effort. Typically, if you create a document in Word and make it accessible, which I'm going to tell you how to do, so don't worry, but if you make a Word document accessible and convert it to a PDF, most of the time it's going to maintain the accessibility. The problem is if there are a lot of images or decorative elements that are built into, like the decorative elements that are built into Word or PowerPoint don't translate as decorative to a PDF, so you have to tag them as decorative. Or if there are tables or other things that may need additional explanation because the formatting from the Word document may not translate over. So that's the only tricky part. If it's just a plain Word document, just text, and you don't really have much else going on, that's probably going to be just fine to convert it to a PDF and share it out that way. But if it's got a lot of other elements, so for instance, when I converted this PowerPoint to a PDF, every slide, like all these bars, there are bars at the bottom that are orange. I had to tag every bar as decorative so that it wouldn't read it. So that's just a step that you want to be aware of. And then reading order, you can specify the logical reading order so that screen readers announce content in a meaningful way. And again, if you're formatting it using headings and list elements through Word, it will automatically do that. So, but if you're, especially like in a PDF, if there are like a lot of text boxes and things like that, then you want to make sure that you're tagging the logical reading order. Laura said, I've had issues with accessible PDFs. How accurate is the PDF checker? Is it effective? Prefer to send a PowerPoint or PDF? So I guess I would need to know what specific issues you've had with your accessible PDFs. So one thing to know, like if you scan in if you scan in a document and scan it to a PDF, that's just an image. So it's going to show up as like one big image. It's not going to read it as text. That's just a FYI if anyone did not know that. So you would have to alt text the entire document, which you wouldn't do that. But basically it's just showing up as one big picture. If you have the Pro version, the PDF checker is very accurate. It's just making sure you know how to fix the issues. And sometimes those can be tricky because some of the issues that come up in a PDF are within the order or being tagged as an artifact or other tags that you can put on it or that might automatically be generated that can cause confusion for the screen reader. So you have to go in and remediate those. So the PDF checker is accurate as far as like what it shows. And the other thing that's great is if you have someone on your staff or board or someone that you can work with who's a screen reader user, they can double check if you have a PDF that's being tricky, because sometimes it still reads correctly with a screen reader, but it may just be showing up like that it's unclear, that the PDF is unclear if it's doing it right, but the screen reader is still going to read it correctly. And then let's see, Anna had another question about lost you. Another question about hyperlinks. I've been told you have to say something like click here and read more, and that whole sentence is the link. Is that correct? That is correct, and that is in this presentation in a minute. But yes, you want to make sure that it's telling the reader where it's going to take them. So you don't want to just say click here or link to. You want to say where the link is going to take them, where the click is going to have them end up. So you want it to be meaningful. And then Janice said, learning how to remediate a document would be really helpful. Is there a chance you would do a training on this? Yes. Another thing that often, and I'm going to tell you how to remediate some things, but PDF is a whole, yes. Another thing that often gets overlooked is building accessibility into your budget for transcripts, translate. Yes, definitely. You want to make sure, no, you're fine. There are a lot of questions and we try to get to everything. I am going to show you how to remediate Microsoft because pretty much everyone has access to Microsoft. But the PDF, if you would like further training, you can contact me and we can talk about that and I can talk you through it and I'm happy to do that.
Amy?
Yes.
There was a question earlier and if you answered it, I apologize. Carla asked, do you have recommendations for a place to learn more about PDF remediation through Acrobat Pro, assuming this is outside the scope of this workshop? Did you answer that yet?
Well, you can either contact me and I'm happy to help you, or Adobe Acrobat does have some, like if you do the checker and it says, it has like a little drop down box that says fix, or if it doesn't let you fix it, it'll tell you read more and you can click there and like read about it. And then they also have some videos online. But I'm happy to help you with that as well. If you just want to reach out to me, my contact information is at the end of the presentation as well. So it can be a little tricky. And once you've like overcome those obstacles once or twice, then you just, it becomes part of doing the work and you can, so it's just kind of getting over that hump of like the first time learning how to do it usually. All right, so where do we want to make these changes? So Google Docs, Pages, Sheets, or Forms, Microsoft Office, and Adobe are some of the main areas that most people are using these days. Google Docs. So Google Docs, we love, we hate at the same time. It has some basic accessibility controls enabled, but they're not as good as Microsoft or Adobe as far as the features. And exporting, this says a PDF, but honestly, exporting anything from Google quite often, Google Suite quite often loses the accessibility. So we've had that where, like with Google Slides, where we lose alt text, where we lose. So the back and forth can be a problem with Google Docs or Google Suite. When you're, so if someone is sharing their presentation with you in Google Slides, it's safest to keep it in Google Slides and recheck it there. If you download it to PowerPoint, you're probably going to have to recheck everything, and you may have to remediate a lot. We had a presentation, we had a conference on accessible digital accessibility in September, and almost all of our presenters shared their presentations through Google Drive, which was not necessarily what we requested, but that's what we got. And so we kept having to send them back and say, this is not accessible. So finally we said, like, just send it to, like, just download it into a PowerPoint, do the accessibility, send it to us, and we'll keep it as a PowerPoint, because it tends to not lose accessibility as much as Google Suite. So just know that that is a challenge sometimes. And any experience with Canva? If so, is the same issue as converting from Google to PowerPoint? Yes, there are some, and usually it's different issues. But Canva, we haven't had as many issues as with Google Suite. So as far as keeping the work that you've already done. Another thing, like with Google, with the docs, a lot of times, like if you use their heading levels or create a table of content, like, and then you download it to Word, it loses all of that as well. So just be really careful with the back and forth. Like if you create it in Google Docs and keep it in Google Docs or Slides or whatever it is that you created in the Google Suite, and you keep it in the Google Suite, you're probably okay. It doesn't have the same depth of accessibility tools, but it should keep the accessibility between sharing it. But if you're downloading it and uploading it between Microsoft Suite and Google Suite, that's where you lose a lot of work that you may have already done. Okay, so Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, there are some key things that you want to do. You want to use the styles provided, especially for headings, but also for lists. So when you are in Microsoft Word or PowerPoint and you have the toolbar across the top of your page, and it has like the styles formatting where you can format the headings, and you want to use those because they're the heading levels. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so what you want to think about is you want to use the title heading as the title of your document, right? So what is this document? So the title of this presentation, I would only use that once on the title slide. I don't use it over and over again. And then heading levels are like the chapters of a book, right? So you've got your title of your book, and then you've got chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So each big section of information. So our titles are, our title is, let's talk about accessibility. And then it had a subtitle. And then our heading level 1 was who we are at Able. And then our next heading level 1 was plain language and readability. And then our heading level 2 are the subgroups within that chapter, right? So within plain language and easy read, or then we have plain language is a level 2, and then easy read was a level 2, because those are both subsections under that heading 1. Then we got to digital accessibility. That goes back to heading 1, because that's a new section, but the heading levels within that section are, the information about Google Docs or the information about things you may need to know, and then Google Docs, and then Microsoft Word. Those are all level 2s. So that's how you want to organize your information on the page using the heading levels. And then instead of like typing one dot or using a dash or something, formatting it as the list that it gives you with the bullets or the numbers, formatting it within the document so that the screen reader will read it as a list that way. Because if you just put a dash or a mark, it's not necessarily going to format that as a list. Visually, we could see that it's a list, but the screen reader would not necessarily see that it's a list. Okay, the levels, yes. So when the title of our conversation, well, we are having a conversation, but the title of our presentation is let's talk about accessibility, right? And then the subheading, I'm trying to remember the exact title. I think it's accessible communication for all. That's the subheading. Then the first level, heading 1, was the first section, which we talked about who the organization that I come from, Able, South Carolina, who we are. Then the next section that's heading level 1 was talking about plain language and readability. And then we broke that down by plain language specifically. So that's heading level 2. And then easy read specifically, that was another heading level 2, because they come beneath heading level 1. So heading level 1 was, we're talking about making things easy to read overall using plain language and easy read tools. And then beneath that, we broke it down further into those specific topics. So this is what plain language is, this is what easy read is. And then the next heading level 1, because we start a new topic area, is digital accessibility. Then under digital accessibility, we have a few heading levels, because we have that first information where I just talked about what is accessibility and who does it affect, right? So that's a heading level 2. And then beneath that, these specific topics about Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Suite, like those are all heading level 2s. If we got down further after that, then we would go to heading level 3 or list. So that's kind of how that works. So those are the styles that are built into Microsoft Suite, and those will help you organize information to best support your reader. And then you want to make sure that all images have alternative text, including any charts, maps, anything like that. And so I'm going to talk about, again, we're going to go deeper dive into alt text. Yes, it does sound like doing an outline. Hey, hold on one second. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to take just a minute. So sorry, everyone. I'm working from home. I had a little situation. But we are going to go deeper dive into alternative text, but anything like a chart, a table, a heat map, anything like that, that's a visual representation of, or then we need to give a verbal explanation of that so that the screen reader will read it. And then we need to use color responsibly. So again, we want to use bold instead of italics to emphasize text, because italics can be difficult to read. But also we want to make sure that there's good color contrast. And so one of the things that I give an example of is probably the best example of not having good color contrast is a hotel conference room. It's usually like a light beige on a dark beige, print, things like that. So this, like with our presentation today, you can see it's dark text on a white background, and then there's just colors just used to emphasize with the bullets and with, the decorative bars at the bottom. So you want to use color only to kind of be there to offset things, not to take away from the information. So you want to avoid similar colors on top of similar colors. So light blue on a dark blue, light gray on a dark gray, things like that reduce color contrast. You want to make sure your link's text is meaningful and descriptive. So you don't want to use click here. We've already said that, but you want to say where that click is going to take them or where that link is going to take them. So you want to spell that out. And when you do the checker, which we're going to show in just a minute, it'll tell you when you have unclear hyperlink text. So it'll remind you. Yes. So WebAIM contrast checker is really great tool. That's one of the best tools to use. And we do have the tools listed in the in some of the slides at the end, but WebAIM is a great resource in general for digital accessibility. So WebAIM tools are great. So that's a great thing to use. You want to make sure that you identify your document language. That's especially important if you're using different languages, to make sure that you're doing that across, if you're regularly using different languages. Tables are for data, not layout. So a lot of times, instead of creating like text boxes to put like 2 columns of information, people are using a table. And so it's very hard for a screen reader to read a table in general. You have to make sure it's formatted really well. So it really is challenging if you use it to create content on the page in that way. So you want to make sure that the label, that the content is laid out correctly. Okay. So this is showing you how to use the accessibility checker within Microsoft Suite. So that's Word, PowerPoint, etc. So the first thing you want to do is you want to go to the File menu and go down to Inspect Document, and that will have the 3 boxes, and one of the boxes says Check for Issues. And when you click on that box, it brings down a drop-down menu, and the choices are Inspect a Document, Check Accessibility, and Check Compatibility. And you're going to check off Check Accessibility. And then you will get an accessibility dialog box. And this box will show you what is missing or incorrect and give you information about how to fix the problem. So you can see there are 2 examples here. One is from Word and one is from PowerPoint, and it will show you your issues. So you can see on the first box that's on to the left of the screen, it's for Microsoft Word, and it shows the errors are missing alt text. And so there's a picture number 2 on, oh wait, no, that's PowerPoint, sorry. But there's a picture 2 on slide 30. And when you click on that, it'll take you to the picture on the slide. And you can also see there's some warnings about unclear hyperlink text, and then some tips about things that might be an issue. And then on the Word document, you can see again, there's some missing alt text, as well as infrequent heading use is a warning, and unclear hyperlink text. So those are the things that you would want to fix on these documents and presentation to make it more accessible. The great thing about it is if you click on it, like if you click on where it says picture 1 or picture 2, it will take you to that place in the document or presentation. Same thing with the unclear hyperlink text. If you click on it, it'll take you to the place in the document where that is. And the way that you can fix the hyperlink text is, if you're a mouse user, you would right click on it and you would choose edit hyperlink, and then you can type in a title for it and you won't lose the hyperlink, but it'll let you rename it in that dialog box. So that's a great tool to use. This was a South Carolina procurement form. So you can see it has a ton of very long hyperlink text in it. Also didn't use headings, and it had, I think, just a logo that wasn't alt texted. So those are some of the things that come up, and things like logos or like the little images for social media, things like that are a lot of times things that get missed with alt text. Okay, so some tips for PowerPoint that can be helpful. So when you're if you're using an image or a table only on the slide, instead of posting that or pasting that over the dialog box, because a screen reader will still read the dialog box even though it won't show up visually in the background, it's going to read that there's an empty dialog box. So you just want to use the title only slide, because you do want to title every slide so that the screen reader knows how to move through the presentation and identifies for the screen reader user that it's on a new slide. So you want to title that slide, but then you can just put the image or the table there instead of using an empty text box behind that. But if you do use the same slide over and over, same slide title, you want to either number it, like plain language 1, plain language 2, plain language 3, or use continued if it's just 2 of the same. There's a question Anna asked earlier about hyperlink. Should it be the entire sentence link instead of click here with only the word here being linked? Yes. So you should hyperlink where it says like click here to access registration form. That should be the hyperlink. So it might be link to a video of our event, and that should be the hyperlink. Link to the video of our event is the hyperlink. So it's not just saying link, it's telling you the whole thing, because what happens is when you click on it, like if they click to the link, they're not going to read the rest of that after the link because it's already going to take them where they're going. And so they need to know where they're going. So it'll read that whole hyperlink for them. But you also don't want it to read http www.able-sc.org/registration/form, like you don't want all of that. But so you want it to be clearly stating where that link is going to take them. You don't want them to have to read the whole hyperlink address, but you also don't want it to just say click here or link here. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Descriptive settings for links in Word. Are you talking about for the hyperlink, Chris? Yes. So that you can highlight the hyperlink, or just, well, not highlight. You can either highlight the sentence of where you want to link to, and then right click on your mouse if you're a mouse user, and then it'll give you a drop down, and you can put insert hyperlink to what you've highlighted. Or the back side of that is you can insert the hyperlink and then right click on the hyperlink, and it'll say edit hyperlink, and that's across all Microsoft Office. So then you can retitle the hyperlink. So you can use that for Word, PowerPoint, any publisher, anything in the Microsoft suite uses the same mouse commands to do that. Remember that all images and shapes need alt text. So anything that you put on a slide, if it's a decorative item, so the cleaner and less busy PowerPoint you can use, the better, because the screen reader is going to try to read every element on that slide. So if you do the one with like all the concentric circles or things like that, it's going to read like that there are 5 or 6 decorative items on there. So the cleaner you make it, the better. But also if it's not already alt texted, you're going to have to alt text all of those elements so that it knows it's a decorative element. So just be aware of that. The more things going on in your presentation, the more things you have to label and describe. And anything that's a visual aspect of it will need to be labeled and described. All links need a description of where the link leads, which we just covered. And then videos should be captioned and or interpreted for hearing impaired participants. Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know how that hearing impaired is still in there. I apologize for that. We don't typically use that term, but people with a hearing disability or deaf participants. So I'm very sorry about that. My apologies. So screen readers. So this would be another heading level 2, right? If you're organizing your information. This is under digital accessibility, but now we're going to talk specifically about screen readers. So people who use screen readers are blind and other visually disabled individuals. That helps them use to access digital content. It translates written content into audible content. And again, blind users navigate with a keyboard instead of a mouse. Other individuals may also use screen readers for various reasons, including screen fatigue, if they're auditory learners, or just to help reinforce reading comprehension. So screen readers, you actually have access to screen readers right now. There's VoiceOver on iOS or TalkBack on Android on your phones. So you can use those now if you would like to. You can also, screen readers also are commonly used. Commonly used screen readers are JAWS and NVDA. There are some others out there as well. When we do testing on documents or websites, we use multiple screen readers just to make sure there's nothing that's kind of buggy or messed up on one screen reader that works fine on another screen reader. So it's important to know across platforms that things are working. And there are some accessibility checkers out there. The one that we like the most is the Wave plugin for your browsers to check websites and things like that. It's through WebAIM as well. And there are some pros to that. It's very educational and eye-opening. It shows you things that you may not have thought about as someone who doesn't have a visual disability. They're often free and immediate for use. So again, the Wave plugin is free and you can use it immediately. You can turn it on and off. It doesn't automatically read every page, and you can read a page and then go back down and change it. It will give you a list of issues as well as a full report. Typically, they allow you to learn about built-in features and applications, and you don't have to know all the terminology. It'll give you an explanation of what's going on. The cons, sometimes it won't show an issue that a screen reader user will encounter because it might be something that is glitchy for the screen reader itself, but doesn't show up on a checker. Also, sometimes it will show that there are issues when there are not issues. And sometimes it only works with certain browsers or software programs, so that can be limited. I know that the Wave plugin does work with Google Chrome and Firefox. I know we use it on those two. And then you have to really make sure that you're properly interpreting the reports and not just giving it a cursory glance when you're using those. But it will show you when there's missing alt text. And so that's helpful because I know alt text has been a big question today. So we're going to dive into that. So the purpose of alt text is to provide a description of visual content and information for people who are blind or low vision, to be used for photos, graphics, GIFs, tables, charts, etc., anything that is visual. Also, if you're using videos, video descriptions are helpful for any visual content. I know a couple of years ago, I was working in child well-being and family support work, and a lot of the videos were the whiteboard videos where it would like show someone drawing in a marker and doing all these things, and you'd basically just hear like dry erase on a board sounds, and then sometimes there'd be like a little bit of voiceover narration, but really most of it was visual. Well, that's not going to be very accessible, obviously, for someone who is blind. So, you know, you want to make sure that there's a description along with that of what's going on in the video so that they can experience that and get the same information as well. And then just understanding the difference between alt text and image descriptions. So alt text is something that's shorter and coded into the picture, so it's going to read it immediately. An image description is typically something longer, more descriptive, and is in the post. So it's either in the document beneath an image or in your social media post beneath the image. And so we at Able, as our practice, is to use both in social media. We don't, and then in documents and things like, so again, like I mentioned, heat maps. So if you're using a heat map, there's a lot of elements to that. And, or if you're using a diagram of a layout of something and how that needs to look, that's going to be really hard to put into alt text. So what you might do is say image of a heat map description below, and then below that you can write out all of the elements in an image description below the image. And that helps both blind and visually disabled individuals, as well as people who may just struggle to pull out all the information from something like a heat map or a diagram. And so if you're sharing a really complex piece of visual information, creating an image description can be helpful to remove barriers for lots of different people. So I saw there's something. Oh, yes. So I did think that this presentation was to 11:30. I'm very sorry. If you guys want to stay on to 11:30, we have a few more slides. If not, if you need to leave, I understand. I'm very sorry I had it down for 2 hours. And I'll try to get through this very quickly. So this is an example of alt text. This is the image. We do know the people in this image that we created. And so they gave us how they describe themselves. So we use that in the image, in the alt text description. So it says close up of 2 Black and disabled women smiling and holding hands. The woman in the back is wearing compression gloves and looking lovingly at the woman in the front who's sitting in a power wheelchair. So that's an image description. So I'm going to let you guys practice. So this is an image. I'm not going to describe it as I would usually, because I'm going to give you guys a chance to write an image description. So same thing, or an alt text description, sorry. So same thing, you can put it in the chat, but I'm going to give you just a minute to create an alt text description of this image. Yes, so you don't want it to be too long, but you do want to use person first language. So you don't want to, much like plain, and you do want to use plain language, right? But much like plain language, you don't want to scrimp on the value of the words you're using. You just want to be, clear about what it is that you're showing while still maintaining, respectful language and all of those things. So Susan said, colorful disability pride flag. Sorry, I was reading and I muted myself. A photo of a banner on a light pole. The banner says Disability Pride SC and has pictures of people with different abilities. Very good. Do we add the background as well? Yes, you can. You want to describe the image. So we have a metal lamppost with a white banner reading Able Disability Pride SC with graphic images of individuals with disabilities against the background of a blue sky with white fluffy clouds. Very good. Anybody else? Okay. I want to acknowledge representation in my image descriptions, but don't want to get carried away with identifying the race of each and every person in the images I use. Is there a rule of thumb for identifying representative characteristics, race, gender, etc.? Yes. So, we'll go. This is the example that we used. A lamppost with a banner on it that has an illustration of 4 diverse people with different disabilities and the text Disability Pride SC. In the distance behind the lamppost is the top of the SC Capitol building, which you guys wouldn't know, but against a cloudy blue sky. So yeah, so saying, you can say diverse people or people of different races and backgrounds. You can say something like that, or you can say, with different disabilities instead of saying, without listing each type of disability that's on there. And yes, it is easy to just misidentify people if you don't know them. So we try very hard to either use terms like diverse backgrounds, unless we know the people and how they identify themselves. So like, and that's why I said in the image before this, the people in the image were known to us, so we can identify that. And on our website, again, if you want to go to our website, if you go to our staff page, the alt text image descriptions of each of us is more descriptive because they know who we are, and that's how we describe ourselves. But if someone is, let's say, in a powered wheelchair, or using a white cane, or has a service animal with them or something like that, we do want to make sure that we're using that terminology, because we want disability to be represented. And so if it's visual to someone who's looking at the picture, we want people who the screen reader is reading to them that picture to get the same information, right? So we don't want to keep it so simple that it loses the value of like, why is this picture here? So when we think about that, when we're writing our alt text, we want to think about, why did we put this image in here for people who are able to see it? What's the takeaway? What's the reason that it's there? And then that should be reflected in what we are sharing with art. And then also there are some places with stock art that have alt text. So like Getty Images and some of those places, if you use those, they have the alt text description that you can use as well. And so that can be helpful. Also using things like from the Noun Project, which has like the little icons that you can use. And then that way you don't have to be as concerned. Like if you're doing easy read and you're trying to represent, you know, a vaccine and hand washing and mask and social distancing, you don't have to worry as much about all those descriptive factors. So kind of depending on what you want the image to serve helps you select it and also think about the alt text for it. Yeah. So again, just thinking about, why is it here? Why did we use this picture? And that's what we want the people who are not seeing it but still experiencing it to take away. Great. So some reminders about alt text. All of these platforms have alt text. So Facebook, if you use the desktop, you can go to edit image and select alternative text and enter your text there. On the app, you would click on the little ellipsis or ... by the picture and then select edit alternative text. On Facebook, you may also want to include an image description in the body of the post. That's up to you. We do that, but you don't have to. With Twitter, obviously you do have a character count limit. So you, on your images, you can go to edit on the image and then select alt, A-L-T, and you can enter your alt text there. I would recommend using the same description across all platforms, so that's not confusing to people if they're looking at it on multiple platforms. But with Twitter, we don't recommend the image description just because it will take away your character count that you're already working against. With Instagram, you would go to advanced settings and select, so on the image, you'd scroll down to advanced settings and then you'd select write alt text within the advanced settings. So those are all places that you can add alt text on social media platforms. So that is my presentation today. We are here to help you though. If you have questions about Adobe Acrobat, if you have questions about any of the documents and social media, any other things that you would like to get feedback on, we're happy to help you. If you do reach out to me, if you could just like reference this training so that I can make sure that we're putting that within our technical assistance through this grant, that would be super helpful to me. Okay, sorry. Can a screen reader user select between reading alt text? And so they can. So again, in the like on social media, it's a little different because they would have to, it would like click onto the image and then down to the text. Using the image description in like a document or a presentation where the content of the picture is really complex, I would just reference that the image description is below. So they're really two different uses of image description. So with the image description in social media, that means they don't have to click to the image. It'll just read the description of the image in the post. And so they don't have to click to the image to get that description. In a document, we really use it more just for if there's complex information that's being visually represented that we want to further clarify beneath the picture, if that makes sense. So in those cases, we just say like information in the table below, like sometimes if it's a diagram with measurements, we put it into a table. And if it's like a heat map or a graph, then we just describe it beneath. This is my contact information. So please feel free to contact me. And I'm happy to help you guys out. The slides and a PDF of the slides will both be available after the presentation, as well as the recording will be up in the future as well if you want to review that. Okay, if you're posting multiple pictures in a Facebook post, how would you handle an image description? So typically we would just say a series of photos, like in the image description, we would say a series of photos of our accessible vaccine clinic. And then to get the specific descriptions, you would click on each one. So if they want more information about those pictures, they can go up and click on each individual image, but we would just say something like a series of images of whatever that series of images is. And sometimes if I do it, if it's just like 2 images, I might say, because I do try to do this in my personal accounts too. So I say like image 1, picture of Amy holding her dog Bentley, and then picture 2, picture of Amy holding her cat Aslan or something like that, so that they know what, the 2 are. But if it's like, 5 or 6 pictures, that gets a little bit much. And so you would just maybe say a series of photos showing whatever the thing was. So you would put that, if it's a series, you would say like series of images in the body of the post, but then you would alt text each individual. But you always want to alt text your images, even if you're using an image description. Try to see if I missed any other questions. And you can also, so maybe I misread that too. You can also, you can put a description beneath each image, and you can put an image description there if you want to. That's totally up to you. And I do want to apologize again for the slide that said hearing impaired. I had just updated this presentation and pulled some slides over from another presentation and did not realize that was still in there. So I'm very apologetic of that. We do not use that term typically. I'm not sure how that got in there. Any other questions before we end?
Well, I do have a question, Amy. This is Deb Peterman. Regarding that PDF, do you want to hold on to that to make that change in it before we send it out to
I will make that and
participants?
send it right back over to you and the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Does hearing disability sorry, my dog.
This is Sue Hetrick. Amy, I want to thank you for this great presentation. We knew it was timely and necessary, actually overdue for us to host something like this. And maybe we can have you on again to do a part 2. It looks like there's a lot of interest in this topic, judging from the comments. As Amy and Deb have mentioned, we're going to be sharing the content with you very soon. If you have specific questions about that shared contact, Deb, I'm going to mention your email address. So Deb would be the contact for this, dpeterman PETERMANN at disabilityempowerment.net. And she can answer questions about that. We are going to be sending out a questionnaire, an evaluation, if you will, about this. We'd appreciate your feedback. If you have other questions about our vaccination grant and outreach and increasing the vaccination availability for people with disabilities, you can reach out to me, S. Hetrick, HETRICK, at disabilityempowerment.net. We are having some website difficulties right now, but we do post a lot on our Facebook page. If you'd like to be added to our constant contact outreach for other programs like this and many others, you can again reach out to me, S. Hetrick, at Disability Empowerment, to be added to that distribution list. So if there are no other questions or comment, it's been our pleasure to host this for you. And please tune in for other webinars, trainings, chats that CDE is hosting. Deb, did you have anything else?
I do not, except please consider looking at our Facebook page for future events. We have some coming up next week. And also look at our YouTube channel, which I put the listing in the chat for programs that we have offered in the past. You may find some of these discussions very helpful.